I now call the committee of the whole meeting to order for Monday, July 29th, 2024. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda of the committee of the whole meeting of Monday, July 29th, 2024? Mover, Councillor Ray, Councillor Popoff. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving into new business. First item of new business this afternoon is from City Spaces Consulting regarding the Cranbrook Housing Strategy. Janelle Dirksen, Jada Bassey, and Kevin Green are here to present the Cranbrook Housing Strategy to Council. Welcome, Janelle, Jada, and Kevin. Are you online?
Mayor Price, we're just having an issue getting them logged in here, so we'll just give us one moment.
While we're waiting for them to do that. So, yeah, let's start. So thank you, council. Just as we wait for the team to get on to do the formal presentation, the first part of this committee of the whole is to present the Cranbrook Housing Strategy, which has been a significant project undertaken by the Mayor's Housing Task Force. So it's been sort of 6 months in the works, and we will have the formal portion of the endorsement of a strategy later in open meeting. But really, the purpose of this portion of the presentation will be so that the consulting team can kind of go over the meat of the document itself and how we got there and the types of recommendations that are there. So of course, some of council were on that task force, and I'm hoping you guys feel the same ways as we did as a staff level. It was a very, very good exercise, and so yeah, we're really excited to bring this forward because it's a pretty significant item kind of off a tick list that I think will really help the city go forward as we work towards trying to address this housing crisis that we're all experiencing. So yeah, as soon as we get them online, we'll. Okay. Yeah, it's like the link didn't get transferred over by their email, so.
Are we on the right time zone?
Yeah, that's part of there's Janelle. See, just a quick, and I'll be quiet and I can turn it over to Janelle. So I just for Janelle's sake, I just gave him a quick little introduction as to why we're here, so. And then you can take it away.
Apologies for being late there on the meeting. Just had to download the the app. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great, perfect. I also have two colleagues joining me who will be on as well once they get the app going, which is Jada Bassey and Kevin Green. But I'll get started. Oh, just going to share my screen here. Okay, let me know if you can see it and if it's full screen.
Yes, we can see it.
And full screen?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Sorry for the delay there. As Rob mentioned, I'm Janelle Dirksen, Senior Community Planner with City Spaces Consulting, working on the Cranbrook Housing Strategy. I wanted to first start off with acknowledgements of our Housing Task Force. So the mayor pulled this together to provide recommendations for the content of the Cranbrook Housing Strategy. And here is a list of all the members who worked with us to develop. The creating the strategy process. So this strategy is building on work that was already completed to date, including the Cranbrook Housing Needs Report that was done in 2020 and the unit estimates in 2023. The task force was established to support the development of the housing strategy, and over the course of 5 months, developed an action plan to address the identified housing challenges. And you can see a really high level timeline there from 2020 until now, summer 24. Here's a graphic timeline of our task force process. So we started up in January, did an introductory meeting and went over all of that work to date. Then we jumped into a vision and worked together to form that. Talked about some underlying contradictions or blocks that might get in the way, formed strategic directions, and then worked together on a detailed action plan to create the recommendations. And the follow-up meetings after that were refining and fine-tuning those recommendations for the strategy itself. I'm going to talk a little bit about the housing needs and gaps. First, the priority groups. So through this work, the priority groups that were identified were low-income households, persons experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness, persons with disabilities, persons with substance use or mental health challenges, seniors, and the workforce. And the workforce was both low to moderate income. When we look at the housing system itself, so all the different types of housing that make up a community, some of the gaps that were identified is affordable home ownership opportunities, also housing for those who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness, and that includes a permanent year-round emergency shelter, transitional housing, and supported housing. Also low end of market rental housing and market rental housing. And finally, social housing, which is both affordable and the non-market. Looking at both unmet need and future demand, it was estimated that 1,460 additional units will be needed by 2031. Approximately half of that estimated need is for low-income households, so it's 51% that are earning between $15,000 and $39,999,000. As well as half is estimated for one-person households, 49. So you can see that clear need. Here's a chart that breaks this down. So you can see that we've broken into 5 income quintiles from very low to above average. You can see what the household income is, and then the monthly affordable cost. So what can that household afford per month? And then if you look at the green bar here, you can see how the one person has a lot of strong need and then the low income. So that one person, low income households is making up that 51% of the need. When you look into the allocation of bedrooms, the breakdown is 73% of the estimate should be 1 bedroom, and then an only estimated 12% 3+ bedrooms. Something important to note here is that this is minimum need. So households might prefer an extra bedroom if their budget allows, and this only accommodates for essential basic need. taking a look at the process, going from unit need assessment to the strategy. So the needs assessment was the current unmet need and the future demand to create these estimates. And then the strategy and action plan itself filters this through local understanding and then sets housing targets and a plan to address need. So diving into these recommendations, first we have the vision. So the task force came up with this vision that over the next 5, 10, and 20 years, housing in Cranbrook will be diverse, safe, equitable, and inclusive, with an adequate and appropriate housing supply that's affordable to all renters and owner households. This will be achieved with outside-the-box creative approaches, coordinated and strategic densification, and alignment with government funding programs to meet housing needs. To address identified needs and gaps, new housing will include more supported housing, seniors housing, and housing for low-income and middle-income workers. So quite comprehensive. From the vision, the task force dove into strategic directions and identified these 4 pillars for going forward. The first one was to provide leadership and collaboration between players, so folks within the housing sector. Number 2 was local government support to create affordable housing. 3 is build awareness, community acceptance, and a deeper understanding of needs. And finally, create a long-term sustainable housing system. Now, each one of these strategic directions has goals and actions that are detailed out over a timeline. This timeline, here's a high-level graphic of the timeline, goes from 2024, which is the immediate or the low-hanging fruit, all the way to 2034 plus. And we've broken that into short-term high-priority items, medium-term, and long-term priorities. Here were the very top actions for 2024, so things that need to get started right away. And just a few samples from this list. First one right up top is a continuation or starting a new task force or working group to keep all the players involved. Also undertaking best practices research to explore some entity or corporation that could be established. Education campaign on educating on the housing strategy and a stakeholder communication campaign, and establishing a housing coordinator role to help navigate. It's a high level, but you can see the rest detailed here, and the timeline, which is attached to the strategy, has every action written out. We've also shown here just a couple of highlights of actions. So we have in 2025 a decision on some kind of structure or entity organization for housing. We have around 2027 creating a housing development guide. In 2028, that's updating the housing needs report, which is every 5 years by legislation. And later down the road, we've got reviewing some of the newly established policies that are recommended through the strategy. This strategy will have a monitoring and evaluation framework. So the City of Cranbrook will continue to monitor the trends and identify new emerging issues and report up that information. So there will be progress updates every 2 years. And then, of course, the full housing needs report update every 5. So the strategy is now looking for council decision and approval, and then we will walk into actioning. And that's all we have for the presentation, but of course we can take any questions.
Thank you very much. We'll start with Councillor Blissett, then Councillor Stetsky.
Thank you for your presentation, Janelle. Actually, this is more directed to Rob. How many, I'm not sure if you have off the top of your head, how many units of housing we have already approved that are yet to be built?
Through Mayor Price to council, I'm going to guess, so we've got sort of, call it 300 in the queue with the big proposal at, on 30th. And then about another 150 between the two that were approved, the 5 and 6 story buildings. And then years ago, there was the property at St. Mary's, which is going to be about 30-ish. And just so you know, I saw plans come across my desk today. So people are working on it.
Yeah.
So that's exciting news. And then there is the application that's still pending approvals up on Echo Field Road. But the one caveat with all those is those are all largely full market
Sure.
rental housing. So in the queue, that could help certainly fulfill the upper end of the need. But yeah, so if all of those were to come to fruition, yeah, we're probably sitting at 500 or 600.
Yeah.
So well on our way to at least meeting the upper end needs. And I will qualify some of this a little bit later too. So with the work that Kevin's done and Janelle, we're now updating our needs a little bit because we're having to use a new data set by the province, and our numbers are actually looking quite a bit higher than that 1,400
Okay.
projection.
So with that 500 to 600 that are already approved, we could, sometimes BC Housing does subsidize units within existing buildings. Am I correct on that?
They can. I think there's 2 projects that we're aware of that are working on right now that are working towards having CMHC funding.
Okay.
So those are rental projects, and I believe they're still market, but there's various things that I think they have to do to satisfy funding to get favorable funding. And then certainly if a developer wanted to enter into agreements with someone like BC Housing to secure lower than market rent, they could do that. One of the things that I can highlight in the upcoming OCP presentation, and one of the recommendations from the housing strategy is looking at things like the ability under the new legislation to do inclusionary housing policies, which actually would allow a local government to essentially have a policy that says for every number of units in a project, we'd like to see X% dedicated towards affordable housing, and then those are secured through legal agreements on title, et cetera. So there is some opportunity, as you know, with the one on 30th Avenue, that developer was proposing to work with one of our providers in town to look at getting them some land to target housing towards seniors. And I don't want to speak out of turn with respect to that, but for example, there was the daycare that was included in that provision. I think the organization is re-looking at the daycare component as part of that initial application, because there's a lot of daycares on the table right now, and might be better to use that land for more housing units as opposed to a daycare. So there's still things in play. And so, yeah, as we work towards that, and as our, hopefully our draft OCP, which we'll talk about later, will have policies, and using the recommendations and the housing strategy, continue to build upon those policies and implement them in our OCP, then we could be in a better position to hopefully, whether we have a coordinator or some other housing entity, really push the ability to try and get those less than market rates through some of our other developments. Yeah.
Councilor Stetsky.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. 2 questions. One, what do you think the role of co-op housing can be in terms of meeting the demand for low-cost housing? Because I hear from people that have lived in co-op housing that it's affordable and it also creates a real sense of community. So the role of co-op housing going forward. And secondly, I guess for our CAO, Action D3, establish a housing coordinator role within the next year. Anticipate that being a new position or being able to shift somebody over already on staff into that role?
So I guess just if Janelle wants to jump in on the co-op. So one of the recommendations in the strategy, of course, is to look at forms of entities for housing provision. So that is just one form of housing provider or option. And so that certainly I would expect would be something that would be looked at from a feasibility standpoint. I think that's really what that I guess recommendation is getting towards, is looking at sort of a feasibility study to what would be most appropriate for Cranbrook. Certainly if somebody locally wanted to start a co-op, type housing, absolutely. They are coming, I guess, called maybe back in vogue now. They haven't been around for a while. And I mean, I know people who have lived in them as well. But it's something that could be explored. And of course, you'd have to have the right partners, et cetera. But it's certainly an option that I've seen in Lower Mainland happening a little bit more. And then just to touch on the housing coordinator. So the wording is such that it's not necessarily committed or committal on the position being a direct employee of the city, for example. That could be one option from a budgetary perspective, but there's also other options that are available where we could seek funding. We could look at options like CBT for those kinds of roles. We have actually been in contact with CBT and they've contacted us. There might be funding available for that. We were invited to apply for HAF 2.0. As one of the communities that didn't get selected in the first round. There's, I guess, a HAF 2.0, the Housing Accelerator Fund. And so we'll be looking at kind of resubmitting, and certainly one of the action items that we could look at presenting would be that, because we now have gone over and above without HAF funding by doing a housing strategy, that, something like that, perhaps funding out of that, if we were successful, HAF could help pay for something like that. So there are multiple avenues we would look at. So it's not necessarily the city's going to hire somebody. Certainly in the interim, staff is working on a lot of things, housing. But I think the recommendation as being part of the task force is really to really get at the meat of it. A lot of places are now dedicating or having dedicated resources to it because that's their sole focus. So yeah, that's where we were thinking at the staff level and as part of the task force.
If you don't mind, I'll just carry on a little bit. When you talk about the housing co-op, though, there's a couple models. One is a housing co-op that's a rental and one is for purchase. And so just for interest's sake, on the housing co-op model, like what we used in Jasper, as the chair of the housing corp there. And so the model was basically de-risking a piece of property, building in a national park for a developer and putting an RFP out then that had the units were built and the restriction was on income. And so there was grant funding available that is available still today, that then you can reduce the cost of construction to build the units, and the land is provided or sold at low cost. But then those units, instead of the town or some other entity owning it and renting them, they're actually individual units and somebody buys them. They get a mortgage and they buy them, but it's say a $250,000 or $300,000 for a unit that's fairly, conservatively built. And the only thing that it goes up is by CPI each year. So the person sells it and they may make 10 grand after 10 years instead of, 400,000. But then it's affordable for the next person. And so the initial loan to build is the only kind of risk because you need that capital, but then the bank takes it over as everybody gets a mortgage and takes over the unit. So it's a way to make affordable housing. That's the model that we use there for all of the developments. And I'm not familiar with the rental co-op model, but I've heard a lot of talk about that. So I don't know if Janelle can talk about that or Jada, the rental co-op model.
Councillor Graham, Councillor Ray, Councillor Peabody.
Yeah, thank you. I just a couple questions, and I guess my number is low after what Rob mentioned with the different numbers from the province now. But it's like we need to essentially build 243 units per year starting next year. I don't think, other than when Broad Street came on, that's ever been done in Cranbrook. So that right there to me is a glaring red flag. The second thing that I find a bit alarming is if we want to encourage development, we're not even going to be talking about a revitalization tax exemption or density bonusing or anything until 2026. That's what it says on the check mark here. So I just wanted to highlight that should be something that we address right away, and then put a caveat to it that percentage of houses that or developers that access or use that revitalization, but some of those units need to be affordable. So I'm just curious around the rationale of 2026 to begin that conversation.
Sure, I guess what I can do is clarify. So I think that 2026 was looking at a lot of, not just that policy, but a lot of them. And I can confirm that in the next presentation, we actually have policies embedded in the draft OCP to look at these types of implementations. And at the staff level, we're actively seeking out consultants as we speak to look at bringing some of that information to council in the next few months. So that's on that specific notion. And certainly with the tools that are available, I mean, they're ever changing, but that is a great example where you could perhaps look at a combination of the inclusionary policies requiring certain percentages to be dedicated towards, affordable rental to access the grant, the tax exemption, for example. And the more you offer, maybe the exemption is higher. So those are the fine details, but it's certainly this is being looked at like within the next 3 months, that specific item. I can, confirm that, you bet.
Perfect. And one last comment, I guess, was in regards to F6, which is established policies to set requirements for rental, affordable, or other types of housing to encourage developments that address these needs. I'm wondering if we need to look at something that isn't necessarily policy as a punitive measure. Like, we don't have developers beating down the doors to get housing starts. We have lots on the books, but they're not starting. So I think we need to look at more of it, incentivizing them to look at those versus, oh, well, here's a policy, you can't even build in Cranbrook unless it's this, because we're not in that realm whatsoever.
Thank you. We have Councillor Ray.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of quick comments, which are more pending council approval. So pending council approval. One of the action items is to look at models in other communities. So I hear good things about what's going on in the district of Invermere, as well as in Golden. So anyways, just pending council approval, looking forward to that information being gathered. And certainly there's models beyond our region, but I think there's some good work happening in our region in the Kootenays. And then just one other comment that the team may be aware of. So Van City Credit Union / Van City Community Foundation is doing work around housing. I know when I was at the FCM conference in Calgary, they were providing information about expanding their work not only across BC, but across the country. And I don't have the details on how that works, but it's just another potential resource that's available.
Thank you. Councillor Peabody.
Thank you, Mayor. Touching on the housing coordinator role again. Just curious, is this a position that you see like common in other communities? And has it proven to be successful?
Certainly from the research that I've been involved in, it's becoming much more common now. A lot of the bigger municipalities are actually hiring them on as staff roles in some of the municipalities. And Janelle probably has other examples, but I think Burnaby just hired one and a couple other places. So they are becoming much more common, just simply because of the state that everybody's in and workloads. And really, it's like, us being here as planners. Our job, we're planners. That's our expertise. Getting people in who have expertise in housing and getting housing built or getting, policy matter experts is certainly something that we're seeing a lot more. I don't know if Janelle has any other thoughts on that, but from my research and seeing in the media and as part of this exercise, et cetera, that it's definitely something that's out there. Yeah.
Okay, I have one more question if I may. I was just curious, how involved was BC Housing in the development of the housing strategy? And with, I guess, sort of depending on their involvement, does it give us any sort of like, is there a benefit to Cranbrook having a housing strategy that is developed with BC Housing? Does it kind of make them pay more attention to what's happening in our community?
I don't know if Janelle wants to jump in here as well, but I think certainly having the players that we did at the table lends credibility to the process and credibility to the document. Certainly BC Housing, they have a very specific path or role, but having them at the table allows us to harness their resources, their expertise, and perhaps as we start, if this kind of task force continues and we get into, get further down the line, having them at the table when we're looking at those trying to meet the needs, the lower needs, which are typically not private market development, I think it certainly bodes well to have them on the table. And they were certainly willing to be a willing participant, as they have been with other discussions, also knowing that they're wanting to do projects in Cranbrook. So it does all nicely mesh well together, for sure, I think. I don't know if Janelle has some thoughts.
Yeah, I can jump in there as well. Of course, BC Housing is a key player in funding projects across the province, and it's really helpful to have them early on in a project, just to even test the idea and direct you to the right fund. And I think this ties back to part of the strategy was all about coordination and better communication between players. So that includes BC Housing, but also just between the different nonprofits and housing sector. So I wanted to touch back on that housing coordinator role. We have seen this both in big and small cities. I would say in smaller places, you often hear housing navigator used, and it can be from any organization. So sometimes that does come from a municipality, sometimes that comes from a nonprofit or other entity. But as Rob said, it's definitely becoming more and more important as we recognize that housing has so many different players that need to be coordinated. Thanks.
Further, just a quick comment. I'm just looking and it seems that, you know, when you look at the numbers, based on income, certainly you know, our biggest challenge is predominantly the low and very low income households. And, you know, where does the city sit on that really? You know, I mean, it's difficult. I really think that, you know, the province, you know, has a bigger role to play in town here. And certainly we need to work with the nonprofits, you know, to channel through to the province. But, you know, without the support of the province, that's our biggest portion. And if you know, and we haven't been real successful with a lot of our grants in the past. And you know, that really has to change if we're going to change the complexion of the housing in this city. So that's just, you know, a thought there. There's only so much we can do. Certainly, I think as a corporation, we can partner with somebody. And what's our target audience or our housing? And you know, we've talked about it. You know, maybe if we a housing corp and we target the low income workers. You know, I mean, we have low income workers that are working 2 jobs and they're in this category, and you know, they're good, solid people. They go to work every day, and let's be honest, they're never going to afford a house unless they get some kind of assistance or into some kind of a program. And I'm really cautious on all the rental stuff too. You see what they're doing there is all the low income rental. I think, let's be honest, that's going to be there forever. But if we're going to help the people in our community, it's see low income workers that if we can get them in a price range where they rent to buy, and we can maintain control over those properties until they've paid that off, we can control some of the conditions in there. They have to be working to stay in, you know, and whatnot. There's going to be certain conditions for allowed to stay, and then they actually own that place before they've retired. Because what's going to happen to them when they retire? Most of them don't have pension plans, you know, they're going to get CPP. Well, guess what? They're going to be out of there now and onto the street and doing something else. So I think, you know, a lot of logic is out there that is trying to plug this hole. We got to be careful that we're not creating another problem in the next generation when these people go through and they've hit 70 years old. They have absolutely no assets. They have no pension. So, you know, they're going to have limited means with their finances. So, yeah, I think we need to have a really serious look at that. Anything further? Okay. Thank you very much, Janelle, Rob. Great presentation, great work. And looking forward to taking that next step here. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Full reports tonight for consideration.
Pardon me?
The full reports in the open meeting tonight for consideration.
It's in open.
Yes.
Yeah. The next item of new business this afternoon is from Engineering and Development Services regarding the official community plan. Our path to Cranbrook 2042. Can I please have Rob walk us through the final draft of the OCP?
Okay, so again, welcome. Thank you very much for having us today. So this is sort of my attempt at being funny that it's the final almost draft. But it is, we are at a point at this, in this juncture with this project, and that we believe that we're nearing that finish line. And we're going to go over some of the highlights from the latest draft. There's still some, kind of minor edits that need to happen. There's going to be another advisory group meeting. It'll go on the website for public information. We're going to send it out for legal review to make sure that that's all covered. But we are at about the 95 to 98% here. So that's why it's the almost final. And so we're anticipating, if all goes well, bringing the OCP forward come fall, like early fall, hopefully September, for consideration of reading to get this over the line. And we'll touch on some of those things here during the presentation. And with that, I'll just quickly pass it over to Santana for her to talk.
Thanks. Quick overview, I'll just give you a quick update and some memory joggers about the purpose of the OCP and how it can be utilized. Changes and amendments of note and what was recommended change by public engagement, council review, legislative items. So, and then we'll go through next steps and have some discussion questions. So this has been a longer ongoing project than initially anticipated. Started in 2021 and a lot of really good momentum, and then a slight change with the election, and then new legislation that has come forward has kind of pushed us further down the road. So while we were hoping to have it for this spring for final adoption, the Bill 44 housing legislation was brought in December. And while the province kept saying, we'll give you guidance in early 2024, it just kind of get pushed down the road. So here we are, hopefully summer 2024 for final review, and then adoption come forward. So we all use the OCP in our regular, we use it in our regular working life every day. It's been intended as a guiding document for the community. So just a memory jogger for what is an OCP. It's intended to describe the long-term vision of your municipality. It's that publicly formed document that shows what your residents want, what the constituents of Cranbrook want. So it forms the policies and objectives that guide decisions for municipal planning and land use management. It is the primary tool that guides our community. It is a living and breathing document. So as changes come up or new issues arise, the OCP can be amended and go through that public process. Which is my memory jogger for myself to, when you're looking at the draft version right now, things you might not be fully set on right now, they can be changed. So moving along. The OCP is used differently by different members. So council will use it to understand community vision and guide decision-making processes through contentious land use management. Staff use it to implement the vision and manage opportunities and challenges as they relate to housing, economic development, culture, heritage, hazard lands, and all that. So, it helps us guide, if something is a good policy or a good project, it would align with the OCP. Developers and professionals, such as architects, engineers, use it to gain an understanding of Cranbrook's vision, and it should outline what our goals are, what our hazards are, and help them build or cater to us what we're looking for. And then the citizens of Cranbrook can use the OCP to gain a better understanding of our land use and development history and what community opportunities are planned for the area. It helps them stay informed over the long term. Now I'm going to pass it back to Rob, who's going to go over all the fun changes we've had.
All right, thank you, Santana. So as was noted sort of during the timeline, when the initial drafts came out, we had some extensive public consultation. We did an extensive referral to all the different stakeholders, agencies. So all that information was collected, and we took a look at where the OCP could be amended to reflect those changes. A lot of the changes that I'll speak to quickly at the high level here, include results of the consultation with the stakeholders, public, staff, council, of course, new provincial legislation. And so we really try to incorporate as much as we can that's appropriate for an OCP, obviously to ensure that we have that guiding vision. But we do have to acknowledge at the staff level and even for council too, is that, we can't always make everybody happy. That's kind of the thing that comes of some of these exercises. Lots of people want things to be included in documents like this. And while their comments are valuable and important, some of them just don't belong in an OCP, or they're not, or the municipality's not in a position to have it in their OCP because it's too committal. For example, there's I can think of, I'm not going to name organizations, but they wanted policy having strong commitment to funding their organization. Well, we can't put that in an OCP unless council is going to say, yeah, we're going to commit to funding, a specific organization outside of the municipality. So of course, people want what we can, but again, this is the community's guiding document, it's council's guiding document. And so, we do try to acknowledge that everyone's comments and inputs were taken into consideration, but that doesn't necessarily mean we could put it in the OCP. But having said that, I think there are a number of policy sections that we'll touch on that did have significant or changes of note, and I'm going to go into them right now. So, and then they're in no particular order, they're not in order of the OCP, but you all had the draft to have a look at. But for example, so under the food and agriculture and food security, there was some policy changes that we had to address to meet comments made by the Agricultural Land Commission, for example. So one of the organizations saw some stuff that they weren't super comfortable with, so we tried to strike a balance between addressing their comments and the needs of the OCP, acknowledging that the Agricultural Land Commission doesn't have any sort of approval authority per se over the official community plan to that degree, but they do have approval over land use for lands in ALR. So we have to strike that balance. Certainly, when the early days of the OCP, as we went on there, we had policies strengthened to support food security and, have it in alignment with the forthcoming Cranbrook Food Charter, which Santana's been working on for what we had that grant from Interior Health for that. So, and we would envision that I think once that food charter is presented to council and ultimately hopefully endorsed, we would actually just incorporate that right in the OCP. So that actually becomes a policy of the city. There's policies regarding looking at other food related initiatives such as the community gardens and community growing spaces. Council's already approved one, for example, so that container farm is an example of that type of scenario. So just having those stronger policies that this is something that the city is willing to look at. It doesn't commit us to having to approve everything, but it certainly gives us the strength when those types of things come up. It's, yes, this is in alignment with our OCP, very much like when things come up with council's strategic document. Under Parks and Recreation, we have policies that reference the recently endorsed active transportation plan, including the schedule, the map schedule that's included in the OCP that had the active transportation corridors. So that's again, a really important tool in that for future planning, now that we have a schedule in the OCP, when we look at development and those types of things, we can ensure that those corridors are protected or, those types of things. So that gives us it's a powerful tool. There were some comments that were made from the Ministry of Transportation so that they wanted included, for example, supporting the, preserving trail access, ensuring they remain unimpeded by highway crossings. Of course, that's ministry jurisdiction, and we work with them very closely. They also had policies and a mandate to look at active transportation at the provincial level. So having that coordination and then looking at, having development to include perhaps greater green space components. History has ebbed and flowed with respect to that here at the City of Cranbrook, as it does in many places. But I think it just gives us the policy direction that when we do enter into, development negotiations and things with projects, that where these are feasible and it would make sense that they're included. And we'll go, so the climate action was a big one because of course we have our climate action GHG target. So that was developed through our department, or I guess through Public Works, but in the municipality. When we've bolstered a bit of a policy that provides that high-level support for further water conservation, demand reduction, water metering, initiatives to protect water bodies from drought, and then looking at collaboration on implementing tree programs, for example. Support to review city policies related to landscaping standards to reduce water usage. So these types of things, for example, the landscaping policy would allow us as we review the zoning bylaw, if that's something that we want to pursue, we have a policy that supports us looking at taking that action through a zoning regulation, for example, to create those new standards. Under the environmental and natural hazards, one of the big ones, and I'm going to highlight this because it leads me to what we'll get to later in some maps, but of course, as you know, through the consultation period, there was a lot of concern over the transportation network map. And while the Cranbrook Community Forest isn't in our jurisdiction, through the comments, and of course to show that the city of Cranbrook, for lack of a better word, there's no sinister ploy to take over the community forest and develop it or anything. That there was a bunch of misinformation being spread. I saw it in writing, unfortunately. This is what happens with this. But we have a policy that says that we maintain the city of Cranbrook the city of Cranbrook supports maintaining it as a non-motorized and protected outdoor community rec space. So it's a very clear policy that says we're on side with this, to try and dispel some of those, those concerns or comments that were out there. Looking at exploring initiatives to protect and restore, lakes and creeks as we have been. But again, this just sort of formalizes the work that's being done and supports the continuation of that work. Looking at implementing, wildfire prevention restoration initiatives. One option would be perhaps to look at a way to support, where we would support like a Fire Smart Ambassador program, kind of like we do with Water Ambassador. Perhaps in time that maybe could be something that could be a joint ambassador program. As we know, I'm not going to, we all know what's happening in the world today as we speak. So these types of issues are front and center. And so having your city's guiding document support these things, I think is very important. Looking at the heritage, arts, and culture policies to support reviewing the existing heritage conservation tools that are available, and looking at options that could assist with better protection, for example, or there is support for potentially creating an arts and culture committee. I know we've had them in the past. Doesn't say who, when, what, how, but it does lend that support should that opportunity present itself that the city wants to get into that a little bit further. Infrastructure, of course, is a big component to the city. So we have policies to ensure that we try and prioritize and encourage new development within, existing developed areas that are already serviced, and looking at ways to reduce the needs for extending our services. So that, we're getting into the asset management type of policy things here that support that. Social well-being, of course, there's a lot of issues around that. Much of it is beyond the scope of a municipality, but supporting, advocating for expanded healthcare services. I think some of these comments might have come from, for example, our seniors organizations in Cranbrook through the consultation process, looking supporting, harm reduction programs, mental health services, hospice facilities, looking at to support IH to explore dedicated surgical clinics, those types of things. It is not really committal on the city's part, but it just shows that we have that support, or the city supports these initiatives. So should another organization be looking for something like that? Because as you know, lots of cases will get letters of support from organizations. So when those come in, if we have a good policy document, we can, council can look at that and say, yeah, our OCP does actually support this. We'll make it easier to make a decision to write a letter of support, for example, to an organization to apply for a grant or something. Economic development is a big one. So, in conjunction with our economic development strategy, our economic development officer and just, Cranbrook tourism, all the work that's been done. We have policies that support initiatives, of course, to try and attract more labor force. I think there's a letter on kind of the agenda tonight to something to that effect. Support leveraging city's heritage to boost local tourism. I know Cranbrook Tourism is running heritage walks. So again, just supporting policies that kind of encourage these types of things. Promoting tourism by improving access to our local parks and trails rather than just focusing on ski and golf, for example, because we don't have a ski hill, but it's not just about ski and golf. We have a lot of things in this region, and Cranbrook Tourism is doing a great job of highlighting all of it. So again, it's just lending that support to continue that, to broaden our scope and appeal, perhaps. And then support for conducting assessments that measure impacts of tourism on natural environment and parks and natural areas. So again, something that maybe Cranbrook Tourism might want to undertake one day to see. It's not an uncommon thing where, high tourist areas start to look at, impacts and what those have on the environment, for example, and then make better land use decisions. In the transportation section, we have policies, of course, again, that reflect the active transportation plan, Ministry of Transportation comments, supporting access management and the active transportation plan. Policy to clarify that roads outside city boundaries require approval of relevant authorities. Again, it kind of goes back to some of the other commentary. But it's just, it's more or less, I guess, like an information policy almost, just so people understand that, just because you see something doesn't necessarily mean we have the ultimate decision-making authority. We had some policy that reflected Agricultural Land Commission comments regarding roads and need for road approvals through ALR land. And we added the active transportation map to the schedule section, and then we did amend the map, which I'll get to shortly. And then, of course, one of the big sections in the OCP, housing. So we had to make some changes to the original vision that we had all worked on with how we were trying to target densification and infill. That changed because of Bill 44, so that's now represented in the OCP. The housing needs report update is included to provide those numbers, albeit in 2025. So next year, we'll be cracking the OCP open to update that with the new numbers that we have to have input using the new tool the province just released. And so that's now a requirement of legislation. We have to have an interim housing needs report done, which we'll likely do as an addendum to the original 2020 report, because that is the one that was required by the province, but we could do it as an addendum to the one we have just talked about. And then again, in 2028, we have to do a full housing needs report. And it's my understanding, and I think Santana can correct me if I'm wrong, but part of the reason they're kind of splitting it between an interim and full is that the province of BC's data is a little bit different. The numbers they use for projections and growth is different than the data we typically use from census. So there's going to be sort of call it a reconciliation of data sets. Hopefully that'll help make the numbers more consistent, let's say, amongst that. So when we do the housing needs again in 2028, we will do that. But just as a side note to the housing part, we have done the very preliminary, basically we plugged our community into the calculator. And, while we just saw the housing needs report, the initial one that we did in 2023 that showed 1,400 units. In the actual strategy, the team took the numbers that the province is wanting us to use from BC Housing. So they did an updated option B table just to show, and it basically increased our numbers over 1,000 units. And then using the full tool, to do the 5-year and 10-year housing needs. And this is again, just very preliminary, but I thought I would bring it because it's very important is, using the provincial data set, they're kind of projecting, over 30% growth rate over the next 20 years, which equates to about 1.8% growth rate for the city of Cranbrook. And historically, we've been about 0.8. But ultimately, that leads up to basically a housing needs of about 1,200 and change for 5 years and almost 4,000 over 20. So you can see there's a significant difference in data sets, but we're required now by law to use the provincial data set. So we'll be having to amend the OCP next year to reflect that. But again, with respect to the data set, it all just kind of comes together as a piece of the puzzle, but it kind of, unfortunately, I guess fortunately or unfortunately, I guess the one thing what's happening with the way that we're doing it with the province is that it's going to be universal now. Everybody in BC is going to be using the same data set, the same tool. And then we'll just have to update our OCP accordingly. And of course, when we do the next census period, we'll see where growth rates stand with respect to what's being projected. But, as housing section continued, we have policies that acknowledge or address the SHMU, their small scale multi-unit housing, policies that acknowledges updating criteria for consideration of OCP and rezonings to reflect complete communities, which is sort of call it the new term for smart growth, all those types of things, but it's complete communities now. It's a provincial-led, I guess, terminology, and there's also a project that the province is looking at, and that municipalities can jump on to do a kind of what they call a complete communities assessment using their tools. And I think there's some funding available for that. So basically taking like your OCP and all those types of things and looking at where you fit within the parameters of the criteria of what a complete community is. But we speak to complete communities, but we don't really focus on any other I guess, term. There are others that you're probably aware of for various reasons. But I think it just basically, any of these terms, basically from our perspective as planners, just means good planning. It's good land use planning, right? That's not reinventing the wheel. It's not anything earth shattering, but I think it's important to have that as a component to your OCP. So when we do look at land use changes, we can say to a person saying, if you want to do something, you ought to be looking at these criteria for development. So we get better development and we get closer to being more complete community. We had to add comments that acknowledges that development won't be considered while land is in the ALR. Sorry for the spelling mistake. That was my bad. Unless approved by the commission. So one of the things that came up, for example, was the northern area boundary expansion area. All that land between Shadow and Wildstone is in the ALR. We have it designated as urban holdings because naturally it's going to be urban growth at some point. But they're saying, well, no, it can't be. So it's this kind of weird conundrum. So we put it in there acknowledging that you can't do development unless they've approved it. So, and we all know that, but it's just, they like to see certain things in writing. So we put it there, and that's fine. It doesn't impact us anyway. Other than hopefully it will help the commission staff look at the OCP and say we took them into account. We certainly have new strengthened housing policies that are in line with the draft housing strategy. A number of them are already incorporated, and perhaps more to come because again the housing landscape is kind of ever changing under our feet. And then of course, and then lastly, kind of acknowledging the needs update has to be done with the targeted timelines of 2028 and every 5 years after. From the implementation section in the OCP, we do reference the ability now look at policies were amended or added to support looking at or adopting the new financial tools available to us. So development cost charges, amenity cost charges, and community amenity contributions. So a lot of these, again, we'll be discussing through the other projects that are forthcoming, the DCC projects, but we're reflecting the new tools that were added in the past few months in the Local Government Act, so we don't miss it. If something that council wants to consider, the policy's there. And then looking at some of the changes for the land use designations, of course, in general, we have a policy now that looks to support, again, complete communities, policies to support collaborative planning with the RDEK for development outside city boundaries. Looking at policies to support exploring tools to incent development in Victoria downtown areas designated high density. So that's back to Councillor Graham's comment. So the policies are already embedded in the OCP in addition to the housing strategy. So, and we're actively working on that as well. So it all ties in nicely. Looking at the urban holdings designation, of course, policy just to reflect the comments from the Agricultural Land Commission. And then with the respect to the residential land use, we've removed the low density and replaced it with what we're calling the infill due to Bill 44. And then amending the infill designation policies to reflect the small scale multi-unit, which of course we're in compliance with the provincial legislation, but the OCP now reflects that as well because we're required to do so. And then a couple of the big items I think that are of interest for sure for council, the land use schedule. So the one on the left was the early iterations of pre-Bill 44. We were looking at the sort of the concept of infill, and so the darker yellow was where we were looking at targeting the infill when we initially were looking at gentle density, duplex, fourplex, that kind of discussion. Again, Bill 44 kind of changed that. And what you see on the right is the infill residential land use designation is reflected by our zoning now for the small scale multi-unit. So the real difference was that we initially were trying to have a more targeted approach. But unfortunately with the legislation that wasn't doable. This is another one that through the work primarily with council. The one on the left, for example, is the Victoria corridor. as it was before, recognizing that there was desire at the time, which was kind of consistent with our current OCP, to have that more of a commercial section, but given the housing issue that we have, the one on the right, you can see what was pink is now brown. So there's a lot more of the parcels dedicated towards both high density and medium density land use designations. So in the event that someone comes in to want to rezone those, the land use designation is there, then we're prohibited from holding a public hearing, et cetera, et cetera. The one thing that I will note with respect to the land use designation is that it doesn't entirely take away, though, from the ability to do mixed use. And so the land use designation in the OCP does generally reflect that it's, that it's for high density, but does acknowledge the ability to do mixed use. And so when we redo the zoning bylaw, we'll be looking at how that can be implemented. So the option is still there, just in a different way, but we are pre-designating land to try and meet the future housing need, which is one of the requirements of the province now. So under the new legislation, of course, you have to do your housing needs, and then we have to pre-zone and pre-designate in the OCP and zoning the land for that use. And so that's what we've tried to attempt here in the, for example, the Victoria Ave corridor. And then another one that I think is just important, and this is sort of the last but not least, is the road network map. As you know, that was a very, call it contentious piece when we did the public hearing draft. So just for the sake of clarity and to clarify any misconception or comments that may have been made when, with respect to people suggesting that perhaps there wasn't anything in the OCP before. Our current OCP on the far left is what's in the OCP today, the lines that you see. The one in the middle is the RDEK's Rocky View OCP, so reflected in both OCPs that were in place since 2006 and probably when I leave the RDEK, 2010-ish when we did the OCP. And then the one on the right was kind of the original draft that sparked the commentary. Again, I think partly misunderstanding, partly because people are protective of the forest. The biggest thing that I just wanted to clarify for council is the major road network map is literally, it's a transportation planning exercise. It's how are we going to move people? But we totally understand and respect the concerns. It's not, call it the sword to die on for the city. So we took all the comments from the feedback and ended up with what you see here. So again, the original draft on the left, and then our amended draft removing those concerned roads. And that's now in the OCP. And it's also been slightly amended to make that dashed line go straight instead of that weird kind of maybe not even 45-degree angle, because that's actually where the road's built now. It's paved. That's the College Road, the new College Road. So now it just, if you go back to that weird little jog, that was kind of that intent, I think, back in the day. Now it's a straight line because it's there. And then the other one is still reflective of both OCPs. And again, it can be changed. Ideally, when the RDK does their OCP, which is in the works, if there's some changes to that, we'll make sure that our OCPs reflect each other. But that's just something that I wanted to just highlight, because I know that a lot of council heard a lot about this one and all the things that came around it. Again, it wasn't anything sinister on staff's behalf or anything. It was simply a transportation planning exercise. And
before you jump on this one, maybe we should have a little chat just on follow-up for this. Like, there's a place where public comment changed a plan, and, just given what's going on now, would it be worthwhile doing something in the media to say, this is where we're at with the OCP, this is what we heard, here's what the new plan looks like, just what Rob presented to council, getting some of that out to the public. I just wonder, what are your thoughts on that?
Councillor Papa.
Thanks, Mayor. So do we bring something back to the public's attention that we're not getting any feedback on right now? I mean, there were some original outbursts at the beginning of this. I don't think we're hearing anything now. So is it worthwhile to fire it up again and get it out in the media? Because we know how much retention and real truth versus fake news occurs from these things. So I don't know, unless we're getting a lot of attention on this right now, I would just let it sleep.
So what I can confirm is part of the process, particularly as part of the amended, I guess, call it work plan, because of the SHMU, is we will be doing another kind of final meeting with the advisory group. And the consulting team will be preparing kind of an overview document of the OCP, and it'll go online on the project website. And that's where it'll be highlighted. And I think it'll just be like, here's the latest OCP. And I think we'll probably look at something similar to this as like, you know, the biggest feedback we heard was X, here's how we changed it for you, right? And so we are going to be getting there at some point. And I mean, I'll share it with Mark once we're ready and how that's going to unroll, but that's part of the plan, but we're not going to be going back looking for more feedback. We've done all the consultation I think we can to the best of our ability, but certainly we will look at ways to kind of highlight it, but maybe not just draw attention to like this item. It'll be, here's how the OCP's changed, and there'll be a bit of a document that summarizes the OCP is kind of what we're envisioning. So yeah, but I think this was just an important one I wanted to highlight for council because I know you guys were catching a lot of it too. And so this is how it was reflected and how we addressed the comments, and that shows that this is what the process is about and how the process works.
Councillor Stetsky?
Yeah, several comments on the overall, but just on this one in particular, I'm still confused because what is that light blue dotted line then? So we took out the potential Highway 3 connector, which was the dark blue, and we took out that curved light blue, but there's still a dotted light blue line that joins in with the new addition. That's straight shot from the college. So what is that?
So that from the current OCP and the RDK is still it's a different level of road type. So that's what you're seeing is it's exactly what we have in the OCP today and with the Rocky View. It's just a different color now.
Okay, so go back to so there it's green and yellow.
That's the current OCP, the coloring of our GIS. It's just the colors that we use in the legend. If you look in the OCP, the legend actually tells you what each color represents, whether it's a major arterial, minor arterial.
But is that a proposal for a new road then connecting Park
It's
Royal
the
to?
small portion on the right here, the small segment is built. The other one is still a potential future connector that's on the map that's consistent with what's in the OCP today and Rocky View.
That'll
right now.
still be controversial if that's a new road proposed to go.
Well, again, it's not necessarily that we're proposing the road. It's a potential corridor. And again, we don't have any jurisdiction over that because it's not in city limits.
Yeah.
But while it might be controversial, that's why I showed you this slide is because it's in the OCP now. So that's one thing to clarify is it's not something we just made up. And it's consistent with the Rocky View OCP, which is outside our jurisdiction. So the two OCPs do speak together with the same thing. If in fact we want to make a change later or even now, I mean, certainly we could, but this isn't something new. What was new is gone. That's the main thing. Yeah.
So how would you define then that yellow and green dotted line? When the public say, what is that?
It's not ours. The yellow and green is our OCP or current OCP. Can you open up the OCP itself for me? I'll have to try and figure out how to get.
If we need to make it clear that they need to beat up the RDEK to get that removed, that's fine, but still in our current OCP, so we need to define what that is, or we will still hear from people that we're proposing a new road.
Well, and we may, but again, I think the justification is that it's consistent with our current OCP and the RDK's OCP. And if the RDK going through their planning exercise decides to remove it, then we'd look at doing the same. But we're trying to be consistent with future transportation movement within and outside our jurisdiction, so they mesh.
I just think we need to say that if that line's going to come out, people need to talk to the RDEK.
They're both. Keep going. Yeah, keep going.
I think for the perspective of these there's not a plan to build a road there. It's just to make sure that should development or something occur in the area that we don't prevent the ability in the future for something to be built there. So rather than it being a proactive initiative to say we're going to start constructing somewhere, It's if there's future land use changes or any major development in private property, which much of that area is in private property, that would inhibit the ability for a road to happen there in the future, that it is flagged, and we can understand and have that conversation at that point in time.
Thank you. So, Mike, Rob,
Councillor Papa.
thanks, Mayor. Why can't we just eliminate that line? For all the reasons we've just been talking about, why can't we just eliminate the line? If it's a regional district line, they can keep it on theirs. We don't need it on ours, and we don't have any plans on doing any building there. So why can't we just eliminate the line as far as our OCP maps are reflected?
We certainly can. I mean, if council wants us to look at that, we certainly can. Again, I was just highlighting that it's not something that's new. This is what's in our OCP today that was since 2006.
And I understand that,
Yeah.
but why do we want to have to talk our way through this for some members of the public if it just has no meaning to the city and more to the regional district?
It certainly does have meaning to us. It's just something that is not a current planning objective based on what we're looking at right now. So if we do remove it, we're essentially saying that we no longer have any interest to consider that in the future, which is not what we are trying to say through this from a policy perspective. From a policy perspective, we need to be working more strongly with the RDEK and the Ministry of Transportation on this larger network plan, because in the past, with a lot of these policies, if we are not proactively working alongside the RDEK, then decisions have been happening based on their jurisdiction, not working with our jurisdiction. And then we do have some of these incoherent or planning practices similar to when we've talked about development practices in those areas where we don't have a seat at the table as far as saying from a policy perspective, we want this to be considered for future growth and development planning.
Rob, are you done with your presentation? Okay, well, I'll get Councillor Ray. She has a question on this, and then we'll move back into your presentation, and we'll field some more questions when you're completed.
Thanks, Mayor. I understand the concern about this dotted line. I wonder if we could just leave it and just label it RDEK.
Yeah, there's different options. I mean, we could, with respect to the light blue, it's considered a minor arterial that connects the region to the city. I mean, it is outside city limits. I guess that it already is outside city limits. And the policy in the OCP says that any roads outside city limits have to be approved by the appropriate jurisdictions, which is why we did that.
Yeah.
But again, it's if we don't proactively think about the future, those opportunities could be missed. And certainly between now and before we actually bring this for formal reading, for first reading, and we'll see where the RDK is at with their planning exercise and their OCP. And then if there's anything that we can do, we can certainly look at that. But again, I think my only caution is that because it's in the current OCP, I mean, that was developed before I was around. Obviously, the thought behind the transportation planning is that this is a potential corridor. It doesn't say it's going to go here for sure, and the city's going to go build a road. By no means is it intended that, right? But if council feels that it is not relevant, I mean, we can take that and remove it. I think the big issue is that, again, this is the highlight to me, is that this isn't new, right? This little blue line is not new. It's consistent with what's in our OCP today and what's consistent with our neighboring jurisdiction and with the Ministry of Transportation as a three-kind-of-party road network that looks at roads inside and outside our jurisdiction. But we have time, and we will look at different ways if we see that it's still something, or if that the direction wants to come from council to make the change. By all means, it's your OCP, so.
Just a quick follow-up. From my perspective, I mean, I think you could make the argument that more information is better, but just the little clarification that, that it sits in RDK jurisdiction just might help allay concerns in the community. So I for myself, I think it's good to include that information, but just maybe with that little clarification.
Okay, Rob, we're going to get one more question from Councillor Chetsky, one more question from Councillor Graham, then we'll get back on track with your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. I recommend we either remove it or we label it RDEK. Otherwise, we will be having the same discussions we had back in November, December, Doesn't matter what level of road is proposed, it's still a road through the community forest, and we will be right back to where we were.
Councillor Graham.
Yeah, thank you. Similar sentiments, I think just get rid of the dotted line. If you do an actual satellite overview, it cuts right through bike trails and everything else. So it's like, why create that controversy? It might not have been as, when that was put in 15 years ago, the forest was a bit of a different place. So I just think, why create that controversy? It's right through the middle of bike trails. Let the regional district deal with it then.
Back to you, Rob.
Sure, if there's an agreement that we can do that and present it as part of the final draft. And then yes, I mean, again, it's, if we ever have to do transportation planning, because there's enough growth in the RDK to deal with it, then it'll be dealt with then. That's really what it comes down to. I mean, if you feel there's enough concern, we can make that change and just go with that. And then I guess, yeah. It'll look slightly different than that, but again, we did hear the public's comments, it was changed. From a next steps perspective, of course, we're here today with you. We're looking at conducting the final meeting with the advisory group or advisory committee, doing legal review, and then bringing it forward for the approval process, hopefully targeting September if we get everything back and in line, and then, we'll be adopted before the new year. So that's where we're at. And then just leads me to this. And we have time to discuss, and we can take some additional notes if there are any, or you can, take these questions and ponder them. Are there any specific changes that council wants to discuss? Like we just discussed one. Anything in the draft OCP that you found maybe perhaps unexpected, or is there a certain element of the draft OCP that you're really excited about? Again, because this is your document being council's document as much as it is the city's and staff's. And the one thing that I will, again, just sort of reiterate is that from our perspective, I really want to get this over the line. And so if there are little things that, we see that might need a tweak, if they're not burning, if they're not going to be like detrimental to hopefully receiving council's approval of adopting the OCP, we're cracking this open next year anyways. We can collect your feedback, get your thoughts, have those discussions when we open it up for the housing needs stuff, and make those changes, because again, it is a living document. So we don't have to get it perfect this time. We can get it as close as we can, but if there's stuff that, might warrant a change, particularly if it's not a big one, we can do it now, like little easy ones, no problem. If there's something that you're like, whoa, then we can have those discussions. But, if you wanted to keep a list of some of your thoughts, that because we are cracking it open now and 5 years from now, and every 5 years after that, we can do that. So I'll open the floor, or I guess the mayor can open the floor.
Yeah, we got a number. Councillor Graham, then Councillor Sexty, Councillor Popoff, Councillor Peabody, Councillor Ray.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple quick ones off the top, and then it'll still take some time to review. It is an extensive document, and I think it's a good document. One question I had was around, again, on that road network. We disposed of that land. I believe that was on Pile Road, and it still shows that could be a minor collector, and I think we got rid of that land. So I just wondering if we need to rejig that to something to flag there on that.
Go ahead. Yes.
Is that a different road?
Councillor Graham, to the mayor. So the reason, one of the rationale in the report for disposal of the gazetted right-of-way as it did exist is that right-of-way was too narrow to be a road, and the location of it was not something that would be consistent with any future transportation planning. So as it stood, as a physical dedicated right-of-way, it could not serve or function as a road. We still believe that a road should be in there for future network planning, but then that would be discussed during future development should that property choose to develop.
Okay, cool. And then my other question was just around Parnaby Road, and I'm looking at the schedule 10 of the sanitary servicing system. A couple questions I have around that one is, like, I look at the on like where we've put in the extensions. And I look down Parnaby, Parnaby isn't serviced now, correct? Is that, 'cause it says future?
Just have a quick look.
That's
but,
on
yeah,
page, I don't know what page that is.
OCP.
Doesn't tell me.
I should go to there.
285.
Yeah, and I believe the main in Parnaby, if I'm not mistaken, I wish Curtis was here, but I believe that's a force main. So that's actually, people can't actually hot tap into that puppy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And what I'm going with that is just around the, like with that, we talked about with the ALR and the urban reserve. And people, I think, what is it in 26? They'll be paying taxes or 27?
28.
28?
I believe it's 2028.
Okay, so we got a bit of time there, but so that land essentially will not be developable because it's in the ALR, so you'll be in the city, well, you are city limits now, but you'll be in city limits paying city taxes on ALR land, so whether there was a sewer connection there or not, it's kind of irrelevant for development in that area?
I would say that, I mean, the sewer connection is obviously the only way that it would be developed. The OCP does, in the agricultural section, does support exclusion of ALR lands in the city, subject to approval of the commission, which is why it's been given the urban holdings.
Okay.
Yeah, and so we did acknowledge, and we do have a policy that supports doing and looking at a block exclusion and further land use planning for that corridor at that high level. But the routing, yeah, is sort of what's in existence and what might need to go in a certain place. But yeah, the one on Parnaby is sort of that's the force main portion, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And so, yeah, it doesn't preclude, I mean, those, at some point, land between Shadow Mountain and Wildstone, will see development. It's just going to be subject to external approvals that are beyond our control. And then how we want to see that go forward will be through a separate planning exercise that was outside the scope of the details of planning for this OCP. So it would be its own neighborhood plan likely. And again, it kind of follows in line with some of the discussions we've been having with the Ministry of Transportation and the highway corridor study and all those types of things. So this corridor is a little more nuanced than we might have thought back in the day.
Yeah.
Now that times have changed. Yeah.
And then one last question.
Sure.
Is on the woodlands, again, on Schedule 10 with the sanitary servicing, like how are they tied into the city? There's not even sanitary up there. I'm just wondering, like, where does that flow? How does that work?
The one on Echo Field? The
Yeah.
Wildstone Heights on Echo Field Road?
Well,
Or-
Wildstone Heights, but also like the woodlands, like there's nothing there. There's Legacy, but there's nothing.
Oh, well, there are pipes in the ground because they are serviced.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like where does it flow? Because I was under the impression that like the Echo Field does stop somewhere. And if you were to look at the Wildstone Heights, you'd have to bring the sanitary down
Correct.
further. So
Yeah.
I just don't see where it truly stops and that the woodlands is even in there. So just curious on that.
Yeah,
And
and
that's it.
so just to clarify, so the blue lines you're looking at are I think we're labeled as future expansion or upgrades. So that future expansion or upgrade is along the Echo Field corridor. And so we don't have all the existing pipes on this map necessarily. That's sort of this is sort of the future corridor planning. But yes, right now I understand just through discussion with the developers is they are looking at two options, for example, for the Wildstone Heights, whether they bring it up Echo Field or connect through the existing Wildstone development. Yeah. But from a city infrastructure planning perspective, the corridors addressed is where it would likely go. Yeah.
Counselor Stetsky.
Yeah, thank you. 3 questions. Does the map, I couldn't really tell from the zoning, but does it reflect the zoning changes we've made for the seniors development off of Victoria and the new development up off 30th Avenue? It's hard to tell from that scale. Just want to make sure it's as current as possible so that we don't have those discussions.
Okay, of course it's cut off there. But I believe the 30th Avenue is designated as high density, although it hasn't been approved yet. Of course, it's coming. So the other little funny, I guess called little caveat that we're stuck with is we still have multiple applications that are in process under the current OCP. We're really hoping that those will be adopted before we bring this for approval, so then we can amend the maps to make sure that they're reflective of the approvals that are in process. Namely 30th Avenue and the one on Echo Field, which, because it's still subject to MOTI approval and adoption by council. We didn't want to preclude putting the high density further application now because it still requires approvals. We're hoping that those approvals will come, it'll be before council, and we're gonna have to make these tweaks at the last minute, say, before the final OCP is brought forward. And that's going to include replacing the two big neighborhood plans being Shadow Mountain and Wildstone, because the ones you see in this draft are reflective of 2021. We've made a number of changes, some are still pending. So they will be added at the last minute in their most current state to reflect the current state. So yes, we are
Yeah,
kind of,
just
it's
wanna
that
make sure.
balancing act between stuff that's in queue, what's coming down the pipe, and and that's where it gets a bit tricky with where we are at with this process, particularly once we get to the point of actually having formal readings. We probably, under legislation, I believe we can actually withhold consideration of any new applications that come in during that time, because you can't apply to amend an OCP that won't exist in a couple of readings, right? So yeah, we'll be working through those kind of little things come September.
Yeah, just important to be as up to date as possible. of
Absolutely,
course.
100%.
Can you go to climate action for a minute? Back up on the, on your list? So there's no reference there to reducing our carbon footprint.
It's actually in the policy section. These are just changes that were added from the original policy section.
Okay.
Yeah, so all those policies are there reflective of the original draft.
Okay,
And they've
so
been enhanced based on other comments. So these are just kind of the additions to the last draft.
it is in the final draft
Yeah,
then.
oh yeah, we actually, obviously the target is all there, everything is still all there, yeah.
And heritage, well, you've got that up there.
Yeah.
Existing heritage conservation tools, does that include trying to protect our heritage structures, buildings in place? Is that covered under tools?
Absolutely, yeah, it's under, we have various tools under the Local Government Act, and we currently only employ really one in the city of Cranbrook, and that's our heritage bylaw. But the policy's intention through the input that we received is looking at other options if the city deems it desirable to want to further look at protection of heritage and what other options are there so that if that's the direction of council, this council or future council that we want to do that, the policy's there to support that. So it doesn't specify which tools because that gets too granular for an OCP. Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. So if I understand it right, the landfill and then the undisturbed land next to the landfill, it's zoned ALR. So at this time, we could not propose an industrial lands development because ALR would say no. Close enough?
There's history with this one. So in when did we apply? So we applied for ALR exclusion probably 5 years ago. I mean, it's a lot's happened. So the city was granted a conditional ALR approval subject to us rezoning it to industrial.
Okay.
So that was the approval condition. Because it's tied to a landfill, we can't initiate a rezoning application because it requires the submission of a site disclosure statement, environmental, Since then, we've been undertaking some of the environmental review. And my last understanding when discussion with Curtis is we've approached and applied to the Ministry of Environment to actually allow us to subdivide the landfill off of the remainder so that when we have to finish our environmental review, we're only going to be doing the review for the remainder to make sure that we get the all clear. So it's designated for light industrial. It's got an approval in principle or a pending approval. And it certainly, as through the zoning bylaw review, we'll be looking at, it'll be zoned industrial, unless we undertake it earlier if all these other kind of dominoes fall into play.
Good.
Yeah.
So that's encouraging. And my other question is it somewhere in this document where we are now going to be prohibiting storage? Like if you look across from Home Depot, there's that whole piece of prime land. It's all storage. We don't derive any real tax benefit from it. There's no workforce there. It's just a piece of dead land that's storage. And we have many of these sites all around Cranbrook. We're stuck with those, but I don't want us to be encouraging any more.
Yeah. And so
storage.
We don't have an outright prohibition policy because it's regulated through zoning, but I can assure you that it's at the top of mind for staff to the point where I've done some preliminary call it analysis to see actually how many acres of land are just being, and how many acres of industrially zoned land are actually just being used for storage. And that is a discussion we will have at the zoning bylaw stage, if that's the desire of council. There's different ways we can do it. We could, you could prohibit it through zoning, so it just wouldn't allow it. We could perhaps create a mini storage zone, and we could zone those ones that have legit permitted mini storage on them, and then remove it from the light industrial, for example. There's different ways we can approach it. We will be having that discussion with council through the zoning bylaw review, because it's definitely, I guess we're in open meeting. It's a top of mind for staff.
Councillor Peabody?
Thank you, Mayor. I think there is some wording that addresses my question on page 61. But in regards to the community forest, like there is a lot of relatively new, relatively like new developments being proposed up there. And I wonder if we need policy or wording in the OCP that addresses access to the community forest from future developments. Because I know, like looking up Mount Royal, like there's a few blocks that have no access to the community forest at all. So if you're, even though you're adjacent to it, you have to walk or bike whatever significant distance. Yeah, to me, it just seems like a no-brainer. Like we're trying to encourage recreation, and to block off the community forest from some of these new developments just doesn't make sense to me.
We're just having a quick look. Yeah, through the mayor, we're just having a quick look at the active transportation schedule, because that's where those connections are shown as part of the network.
Yeah.
And so with that map, then allows us, or I guess, gives us the power that when developments do happen, we say the map shows we need a connection here, so you're gonna give it to us, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just to
Absolutely.
make sure that those connections are also accessible by, all ages and abilities
Yeah.
too.
And that's where the one policy with respect to transportation, based on MOTI's comments, as well as we have, the access management policy to clarify roads, reflect ACL comments, add the active transportation map, road through the community forest removed. Where was it? It was in. We did have a policy that supports the unimpeded access to trails and networks. So there is that
Okay.
has been in place as well.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
And then we also have things like, for example, the policy to lean on with respect to complete communities. Complete communities is building connections, make sure those connections are there. So we have that ability in a kind of a number of different places, I think. Yeah, we're pretty confident with that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Ray?
Thank you, Mayor. So just 3 quick items to touch on. I think it's an excellent document and looking forward to getting it across the line for sure. So in the arts and heritage section, looking at our nonprofit partners in those fields, I just want to make sure that we're, conscious of course, we want to avoid duplication. So, the city has this humongous broad mandate, right, of A to Z, whereas we have not, like Cranbrook District Arts Council, focused on arts. We have various heritage organizations. So for example, there's mention of ensuring that we have a downtown presence and maybe kind of creating a downtown presence. But I think the Arts Council would probably convey that they feel their new site is a downtown presence. You know what I mean? Like they're trying to stretch it out right to Encore into where they are. So just wanted to flag that, because we don't want to accidentally give ourselves work that's already looked after, right? So I just wanted to flag that. And yeah, just that, of course, we totally respect and appreciate the work that our nonprofits do, and the city doesn't need any more work than what we already have. So anyways, and in terms of the 2 committees that are mentioned there, I like the angle that exploring those committees, but again, we all know we don't need any make work committees, those kinds of things. So explore, absolutely, but hey, if there's work already going on in the community and the city doesn't need to get involved, then we're good with that too. In terms of climate change, there's mention of tree canopy. So I just wanted to flag that when I was at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Conference in Calgary, and staff is probably way more aware of this than I am, there was talk about new green programs and new tree programs, or maybe updated. And so one of the key points that stuck out for me was that existing municipality budgets can be used as the matching funding that those programs require, and also that communities can partner together to pool their matching funding, I guess, and then kind of share the resulting trees, was my take on it. So I don't know if at some point that might be a conversation that staff might want to have with the city of Kimberley when we get to the point of having the OCP approved and wanting to be actioning those things. It just sounded like there were some practical opportunities for collaboration to make it more doable and cost effective, I took it as. And then finally, and again, under climate change, I really appreciated, there's some innovative suggestions there. And one of them is power generation opportunities through our existing sewer and water systems. I think that is brilliant. I think that's an example of the kind of innovative approaches we need to be taking regarding climate change. So
I'll pass that on to our expert in public works. He'll be happy to hear that. So that was one of the feedback that we got from kind of the subject matter experts that said, let's make sure these things are embedded. So absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, and we'll wrap up with one more question from Councillor Stetsky.
Just a quick question on heritage, arts and culture. It says support creation of an arts and culture committee, but heritage isn't there. Was there a reason that you took heritage out, or should that read creation of an arts, heritage, cultural committee? Just so we don't get
I'm
yelled
pretty
at.
sure it's still there. This is just again, paraphrased and abbreviated, but we'll double check to make sure it's there.
Okay.
It's all one lump, and
Just
yeah.
don't want to annoy our heritage friends.
Yeah. Again, it's like was mentioned by Councillor Ray, is that, having a supportive policy is important. That's there should the city ever want to go there, or those requests come in and that's the direction we go. And then council can say, yeah, we have a policy that actually supports us moving in this direction. So yeah, we'll make sure that the word is there, but I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Rob, Santana, and Mike. It's a long time coming, and I really can't wait till September. So be back for us for adoption. And I would suggest that council, if you're going to delve into this a little further between now and then, sooner we can get any comments into Rob, I guess. Yeah,
Santana.
Robert
anybody?
Santana.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, get him in as soon as we can if there's any issues out there. So thank you so much, guys. With that, we're at the end of the committee of the whole meeting. Can I get a motion to adjourn, please? Councillor Blissett, Councillor Stetsky, all in favor? We are adjourned, and we'll take a quick break.